Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin. Since this is our first podcast episode of the month, my wife will be taking some questions from our Facebook group, Bits, Spurs, and Good Sense, and we're going to do a Q&A with them.
Alyssa writes, I don't know if it would be appropriate for a Q&A episode, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences on the similarities and differences between training mules, donkeys, and horses.
So, Alyssa, that's a great question regarding mules, donkeys, and horses. I really like one of Ray Hunt's quotes on the subject that mules are just like horses, more so. I have fooled with enough to understand what he means there. So I would say that mules and donkeys tend to be a little bit more in the limbic emotional system than horses are. So they're going to tend to be a little bit more reactive and emotionally sensitive. And that means that sometimes you have to walk a fine line to not offend them. So I really don't do anything different if I'm starting a mule or playing with a donkey. And we've got a donkey named Aston Martin. He's a high performance donkey. And like one of the things I did with him when I was starting with his halter braking and all of that, I really took a little extra time to become friends with him. And I think that's a big key to the mule and donkey thing is they don't handle being rushed very well. A horse is going to be a lot more forgiving of that, generally speaking, than a mule or a donkey will be. It's very, very common when you start to work with mules and donkeys, halter braking, saddle braking, whatever, that anytime you approach them, their ears are going to go back a little bit. They're going to get a sour expression. That's part of that sensitivity. And I would say that it is more important or more time consuming with them to work through that each and every time. So that's really the thing for me with mules and donkeys is that you need to be more conscious of not offending them because they are easy to offend. They are more emotional, which means the freeze and fight and flight is a little more within reach than it is with a horse, typically. And I would particularly say freeze. So one of the things that donkeys and mules are kind of infamous for is sulling up. What we call sulling up is actually a tonic trance state. And this is where they have really gone deep within themselves into their own mind, and they are essentially in the same mental state that a prey animal would be in as it's being devoured by a lion or, something like that. So their pain feelings go away. They're in death mode. And so their brain protects them and kind of shuts everything down. If you ever get a mule or a donkey into this state, it's game over. You're not going to fix that in short order. You're not going to whisper your way out of it. You're not going to tap, 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 and they're going to load in the trailer after a minute. I've even heard of a case of a guy that was trying to trailer load a mule. He had him tied to the front of the trailer. The mule sat down on the ground, and he's whacking on him with a stick or something. The mule won't get up. He just froze. And the guy actually lit a fire. Figured that the mule would not, stand there for a fire to be lit, and burned the mule. And then had to get a vet to come out to deal with the burns on the back of the mule, and no, the mule did not get up anyway. So that's more or less how I think of them. They're a little more raw, and they are definitely more time consuming. I haven't started a mule in a while, but I would say the general rate, I kind of think of them as taking about 5 times longer than a horse. When I did start a decent number of mules years ago, I kind of always felt like I could probably use this same amount of time and do about 4 or 5 horses justice as what I'm spending on this one mule. And I'll say on that too, one of the pros that's supposed to be with mules is about them being sure-footed and all of that. I haven't really found that to be the case at all. In fact, I can distinctly remember 2 of the mules that I've ridden were pretty damn clumsy. So, sure-footed is an individual trait. That's not a thing I would say you automatically get just because you have long ears. So those are my thoughts. I've actually kind of tempted to breed one of my mares to a mammoth jack and try to get a nice big mule to ride for myself. But, I view them as a little bit of a niche sort of an animal. If I'm really trying to be productive and all, I think going the horse route is a lot quicker and easier. So I guess those are my thoughts.
Vanessa wants to know, what are some proper manners when in large groups of horses and riders? Or how to ride in group rides where you have varying levels of experience and confidence? And how do you deal with riders running from behind and past on trail?
Manners and etiquette in groups. That is a great topic, Vanessa. One of the things that I kind of find with a lot of people is that they tend to be a little bit too much in their own world and not real aware of everything going on around them. And of course, when you're dealing with a lot of people and a lot of horses, you may be on a big trail ride and there may be people drinking and there may be dogs. And there could be all kind of stuff going on that can lead us into a dangerous situation. So the general etiquette, we're going to always have groups of horses where some horses really want to move out and go somewhere, and then you're going to have other horses on the end of the spectrum that are going to be always in the rear and always dragging behind. For the people who are on the more forward animals in the front of the pack, they always need to be conscious of the people behind them. They need to be turning and looking over their shoulder and making sure that someone didn't get stuck at a creek crossing and left behind, and that animal got really anxious, and then a huge jump was made, and we lost a rider, and things can snowball pretty badly. Also, we can have kids that may be, hot rodding it, running up and down the side and buzzing right past horses, and it's pretty hard to tell when someone's riding whether they're on a 30-year-old or a 30-day colt. And so it's pretty easy for unsuspecting people to get you in a wreck. One of the things that we have is the system of bows in the tail, and I think that's an underutilized system. Like red bows indicate horses that are kickers. You can just look this up. I've kind of forgotten. I think green is supposed to indicate a stallion, and then white maybe is a real young or green horse. One of the things we don't have a ribbon for that we probably should is maybe mares in heat. I kind of always feel when I'm riding a stallion that it is more up to me to pay attention to the world. But I think it's the same way when I have a mare in heat. If I've got a mare that's likely to be fractious or kicky or might go stick her butt in a male horse's face if I'm not paying attention, kind of like riding a stallion, I have a responsibility there to be aware of my mare and what is going on, and I shouldn't expect the world to live around me. The green horses are kind of the same way. So one of the big priorities there is to not leave people behind. Some horses have very bad separation anxiety, and when they get left, it can get out of the control of the rider in a heartbeat. One of the games I like to play a lot at clinics is one we call Buzz the Tower, and it's kind of designed to deal with this sort of stuff. In that game, we get everybody to spread out about as much as we can, and when we begin it, we'll have one person whose job is to start riding around, and they're going to go around all of the people. They'll use the people like a cone. They'll make circles around them, go in between them, and at first, we very purposefully try to control it where you stay as far away from them as you can, and then as more and more people have gone, we start getting closer and closer until you are riding just a couple of feet. I'll even have them stick hands out and give a high five as they pass and so forth. And this gets both sets of horses used to moving past other horses, cutting in front of them, going beside them, going behind them, facing them, coming up from behind them, and so forth. And it's also good for the horses that are standing still to have all those things done. In fact, one of the graduation things in my colt starting clinics, the 4-day clinics, we play that game, and everybody who is moving drags a tarp, and we will get to the point where you are trotting or loping your colt right behind another colt so close that you drag the tarp across the hocks of the colt standing still. And believe it or not, they'll all handle that kind of stuff pretty well by the end of those clinics. And once you have sat on a horse where someone came loping by and dragged a tarp across your hocks and you have sat there calmly on him, you kind of feel like you can take the world on at that point. Dogs would be one of the big things that I see mistakes. I am a big fan, if you listen to other podcasts, of dog trainers and horses. I think that's a great mix. What I'm not a fan of is people who have dogs that they think are trained that I wouldn't agree are trained. And they are a menace, and they are running all over the place, maybe nipping at horses. They're a problem, and they're out of control. If I have a dog that's a little more run around faster than one of the horses is used to, and I can call him to me and shut that down, no big deal. Maybe we can even release that dog a few times and get that horse over it. If I have a dog that's running around scaring horses and we cannot immediately shut that down, then what we have is a problem. And that dog should not be on group rides or in situations where it can get other people in trouble. One of the other things I wanted to tie in on that is when we're at shows, and very commonly at shows you have a warm-up arena, and then you've got the arena where the show is going on, and a few things that everybody should know about that. The warm-up arena, if you think about it, kind of has rings, and the central ring, the smallest circle, should be reserved for people who are walking. The middle ring, the second to largest circle, is people who are going a little bit faster than a walk, but not really fast. So maybe trotting along, maybe hand gallop, maybe, just a real short lope, easy going sort of a thing. And then the people that are going faster, that are moving their horse out, really trying to warm up some muscles or sort of test the upper end of that RPM gauge, they should be on the outside. You should be aware of this. If you're on the outside going fast and you need to stop your horse, the first thing you need to do is look behind you and make sure that you're not about to stop with someone going fast 10 feet on your 6. I've seen several wrecks. I saw a lady get absolutely knocked smooth out because somebody stopped in front of her. Her horse ran into their horse. She was thrown on the ground and, absolutely knocked out cold. Completely the fault of the rider that stopped in the fast lane. So another thing about that is if you need to adjust something, you need to put on splint boots or polos or whatever you need to do. Maybe you're going to stop and get off your horse. You need to go do that in a far corner, not in front of the entrance gate. I see people all the time. One of the things that really hacks me off, I can't tell you how many times I have hollered this at my sons: don't block a pathway. You don't put a hay bale down in a pathway. You don't put buckets down in a pathway. You don't stop in a pathway. You don't block a pathway. If people are supposed to be moving through there, stay the hell out of the way. So those are my thoughts, Vanessa, on etiquette. Don't leave people behind on the trail. I would really rather myself, if I'm going to ride in a group of people, I would rather know the people or be in a fairly small group. Once we get into the 20 people or more range, it gets considerably more difficult to keep track and control of everything and to keep everything safe. So remember, you're not out there by yourself. You do have a responsibility to be a good neighbor, I think.
Valerie says, as an adult onset horsewoman back after years away from riding, I am interested in how to enjoy and ride your horse when work, illness, and other responsibilities keep you away from the barn for longer than is optimal. What approaches to reintroduction, conditioning, and relationship can help the horse and rider after these unintended breaks?
Valerie, that's a very good question. One of the things that I would like to talk about, and this is similar to something that we discussed with Dr. Tucker. The thing we said with him was that people can put all kinds of studies in front of you and so forth with the drawn conclusion that horses are very stoic and they do not show pain well. Okay, I'm just using this as an example. This isn't a direct correlation. The fact of the matter is that many horses are stoic and don't show much pain. Many horses are absolute weenies and can't take very much pain at all. In fact, sometimes you see them limping, and when you go to find the problem and you look at it, and you're kind of going like, that's it? You're limping like this over that? It's kind of the same way with bringing horses back into work. So there was a study not long ago that took place over the course of 20 years where they had taught a few horses a few cues, I think through positive reinforcement, and then they brought those horses up in like 6 months, 2 years, all the way out to 15 or 20 years. And the study basically proved what great retention the horses had for the cues. And you hear all the time about people talking about a horse that doesn't matter if you ride him once a week or once every 6 months or once every 2 years. He's the same horse every single time. Well, they're not all like that. They're definitely not all like that. I have ridden horses in training on a bunch of different occasions that somewhere between Friday and Monday morning, their entire slate got wiped clean and they had no clue what being ridden was all about. What we got to remember when we're dealing with horses is that we're not just in a sterile environment and dealing with an inane cue to, muzzle this to get a treat or whatever. We have to always have that emotional side of the horse under control. He's got to be dealing with fears, motivations, all sorts of different internal emotional type arguments, and him understanding a cue and him controlling himself and being properly motivated to respond to it under the current conditions we are living with, those are not the same thing. So if I were to get a horse up, let's say he's been off for a few months, 6 months, whatever, I'm going to generally always start that with my groundwork. So the very first thing I'm looking for is whether or not that horse's attention is on me. If his attention isn't on me, then I'm going to do something. And what I do doesn't matter so much. I could change his rate of speed. I mean, catching him in the paddock. I could trot up to the gate instead of walk. I could walk slower if he's trying to pass me up. I could turn left suddenly. I could turn right suddenly. I'm going to do something he does not expect and then break his anticipation, which will cause thought. This is how you bring a horse's attention back to you. It does not matter so much what you change. It matters that you change. So I'm going to go through that process. I'm going to probably play around with that horse for a minute at the gate. I'm going to see, can I move his shoulders independent of his hindquarters, and just all the little basic groundwork, and try to figure out whether that horse is with me at this point in time. Maybe the tension is on me, but the feet are a little stuck and I need to move them a little bit. If they're stuck on the ground, they're going to be stuck in the saddle. So those are the sorts of things that I would play with. I'm also going to always be pretty protective of my horse. So I might have, let's think of an adult. We might have a 35-year-old lady that ran a marathon, 3 marathons on her 35th birthday. And then she gets pregnant. She has a kid. She comes back into it. She's had a 14-month rest. Well, all of us would perfectly well understand that running a marathon right when she gets back into running is not something that should be on the table. It's kind of that way with your horse. If he's gotten out of shape, then we need to be protective of him as we begin exercise again. So as I bring this horse back into work, I might put him in the round pen, saddle him up, run him around, make sure they're not going to buck or do anything unsafe. If that's not really a concern or beyond that, when I actually get up on them, lateral flexion is really the first thing I'm going to work on. We're just, for as much as anything else, we're trying to stretch muscles, flex them, relax them, get them back into the groove. And that's really not something you can overdo at just little jogs or mostly walking. I'm not going to worry about something like collection. I'm not really going to worry too much about vertical flexion. These are things that we're going to have to build muscle and endurance back up for to get back into. So they're off the table for me for a couple of weeks, or you ask for it, but it's for very short periods of time. I'm not going to try to go lope 10 circles collected or with vertical flexion when I'm just bringing a horse back into work. So I really want to concentrate on the lateral stuff, left side, right side, flex, stretch, feel good about it, just like that marathon runner would need to get flexible and strong and all of that stuff again. Now, most horses can trot around and that kind of stuff, and we can work them 30 or 45 minutes without a great deal of concern, as long as we're not doing things like really hard stops, really fast turns. We're not getting into jerking him around real hard. Same way I would introduce myself back to running after a break. That's how I want to introduce the horse back in. I think ground poles for any discipline are a really good thing to start back with. You can be surprised how easily you can wear out an out-of-shape horse going over ground poles for 10 or 15 minutes. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. Where is my horse at mentally? Where is he at physically? And I'm just going to take appropriate steps to bring him back to where I need to be. Most horses inside of 30 days could be back to a pretty serviceable type of an animal. Now, I'm not saying they're ready for a 100-mile endurance race or a 45-minute eventing course, right? Those are a little more on the extremes. But if you wanted to go on a 4 or 5 hour trail ride, if you wanted to go to a show and kind of play around again with moderate expectations, then 30 days of trotting them around and all is pretty good. As far as the exercise goes, I am a much bigger fan of long trotting or extended trotting a horse. That is my favorite gait to physically warm a horse up in. It builds a lot of stamina. They can do it for a long time without getting too winded, and it is physically easier on the horse's joints and all than a lope or a canter is. So that would be physically what I would do, bringing them back into shape. I would probably maybe start out 15 minutes of really pushing long trot, 7.5 minutes each way for the first week. Add a few minutes, add a few minutes, add a few minutes, and before long I'm doing that for at least 30 minutes. If he can maintain a long trot for 30 minutes straight, then probably can go do most things on him, like I say, except for the real extreme physical stuff. So, hope that answers your question, Valerie. It is now time for the sponsor of this video, and this one I have to say was a little surprising. They contacted us completely out of the blue, but I think you're going to enjoy this. This podcast episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship is brought to you by Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth 2.0 Photosynthesis. Quotes, "Sorry about last time, but this time I really am right. Promise." Plants, cyanobacterias, phytoplanktons, algae, and possibly other undiscovered photosynthetic organisms would like to remind you that they've been taking CO2, water, and sunlight and turning them into oxygen and carbohydrates for about 700 to 800 million years, and they promise to continue doing so, whether taxes and costly carbon offset programs are in effect or not. Algae and phytoplankton particularly would like to remind you that they cover the ocean surfaces of about 60% of planet Earth, and that they have been doing this same thing all along, and they are likely to be unaffected by California refusing to allow arborists to harbor timber, preferring to watch it all burn instead. So don't be bullied by eco-terrorists. Don't be a dirty animal, but the Earth's a long ways from being down and out. Thank you again. Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth 2.0 Photosynthesis. Sorry about last time, but this time I really am right. Promise. You know, he made $1 billion off of the last one of these, and nothing, absolutely nothing he said came true. Amazing. And got an Emmy or Golden Globe or something. Oh. Just as an aside for anybody that might have had their feelings hurt after that sponsorship commercial, would like to say that my wife actually has a degree in environmental science, specializing in coastal wetlands remediation. We like plants.
John states, here's a cue for the Q&A. I heard your interview with Jerry Cox, and he mentioned laying a horse down. Is this an important thing to learn? What benefits does it provide the horse? What is your favorite method to get the job done? Thanks.
Okay, John, that's an interesting question on laying a horse down. A few of my thoughts on that. First of all, let me tell y'all, I have laid a lot of horses down. For years and years and years, I laid down every single colt I started, to the degree that I would estimate I've laid down probably between 700 and 800 head of horses. So that has given me a very good level of experience to see what that process actually does to different temperaments and experiences and levels of horses. And I would say at this point in time, there's really only two kinds of horses that I tend to lay down. Those are the really spoiled and disrespectful type horses, and the really bronky, fearful, go into fight or flight at the drop of a hat sort of horses. And when I lay horses down, I do it with ropes. And honestly, I learned that from Craig Cameron. I have tinkered with a lot of different ways of doing it over the years. His simple way of doing it is still what I go with. None of the quote-unquote improvements that I've tried that other people have given me tips on have I actually found to be an improvement. The fearful horse and the spoiled horse, while they would seem to be polar opposites, I really am wanting the same experience for them. And this is what it is, and this is going to sound a little rough and a little crude, but I'm trying to be candid. I want them to fight. I want them to fight the rope, and I want them to lose. And I want them to lose to themselves. I try to stay out of that picture as much as I possibly can. I do have a video of me laying a horse down on YouTube if anybody wants to go watch it. So I don't really ever force them down. Well, let me not say ever. I've had a few horses that it kind of got to the point where, all right, we're just going to manhandle them and put them down. But the vast majority of those 700 or 800 horses, I would say 90% of them fight a little bit and go down within 10 minutes. And it's really not that big of a deal. I have had 3 that took me over an hour. 2 of those were full siblings, a little filly and a little stallion colt the next year. And if I were to ever start another one in that particular bloodline, I would not attempt to lay it down. Those were hellish experiences for them and for me, and I'm good with not doing it again. So I consider the people that lay horses down tactless, and they're kind of using more of a positive reinforcement type approach. I don't really consider those to be the same thing. And this is why, and it's why I want to be candid about it. I kind of want the horse to go through fight or flight. And you'll notice the two ends of the spectrum that I picked. We've got a spoiled horse. We've got a horse that has its own agenda. It's used to getting away with things. We basically have a dominance problem. That horse believes that it's above you in the pecking order. It's above all people. It always has been. Why isn't it now? And how do horses resolve those sorts of issues? They fight and someone loses. So I'm going to tie his leg up to the saddle and he's going to fight, and it might get ugly. Those are some of the worst fighting ones, to be quite honest. And I need him to lose, and I need him to know that he loses. I need him to choose to go down and basically say, hey, here's my belly, here's my throat, end it. I give up. And then they do, and then nothing really happens. There's no reason for them to be scared. I am a benevolent overlord. So these horses really are horses that are overconfident. We are trying to take them down a notch, which again is part of why I want the rope and I want the fight. I don't think that a positive reinforcement situation really addresses that problem of a dominance hierarchy and so forth. So even if you teach the trick through positive reinforcement, you haven't altered the hierarchy, and that problem is going to show up other places, other times. Other end of the spectrum, we have a horse that instead of going into fight, goes into flight. The really scared horses, sometimes they might flip over. This can be dangerous. I do not think just anybody needs to be laying horses down, John. Let me say that right here and now. I think you need to be a pretty experienced person before you are doing this. Those horses tend to be, because they are very fearful, they're living out their worst nightmare. They're flight animals. You've taken flight away. They are going to just freak out for the most part, go into full panic mode. Like I say, sometimes they might flip over. It can get kind of Western. It really can. But just like the horse that wanted to fight, they lose. They go down consciously. They make the decision. That's a big part of how I think laying a horse down needs to be. It isn't that I'm tripping them and putting them down. I am setting up a situation where they are fighting themselves, and they fight as long as they want until they choose to lay down. So that's, I want that to be said. That's a noteworthy point. But that fearful horse finally makes that decision. He lays down. You would be shocked at how long some of these horses lay down. I would say at least half of them, of this fearful camp, when they lay down, they stay down like 20 minutes. And as soon as they lay down, and sometimes you have a couple of mock lay downs and they try to get up. As soon as they lay down, I release the foot, I take the rope off, and I have nothing touching, binding, holding the horse in any way, shape, or form. Most of those will still lay there for 20 minutes. A lot of them kind of get up, pick their head up, look around, lay back down. I had a horse in a colt starting competition that I did this with, and she was pretty tough. It probably took me more than 30 minutes to lay her down. By the time she got down, I was about out of time for that section of the round pin work. She laid there forever. So half of my time that day working her was spent on me literally standing, leaning against the panel, waiting on her to get back up. But when she got up, entirely different horse. It was a night and day change in her. So this tends to take those fearful horses that go into the subconscious, the fight or flight stuff very, very easily. It makes them not go there so easily. They stay a lot more conscious in the here and now. The worst possible thing they ever thought in their life could happen did happen, and then nothing became of it. It wasn't as scary as they thought. And it is absolutely life-changing for lots of those horses. Now, the ones that are in between, that aren't kind of an extreme, they're not really fearful, they're not really spoiled. Frankly, I don't really find that laying those horses down does a lot. It's not a real productive use of my time, which is why I don't really do it so much anymore. If you kind of have a more average horse that's in the middle ground, then I don't think it really hurts anything to lay them down, but it might be 20 or 30 minutes of your day you could have spent in a more productive manner. That's how I generally look at it. And I will say this, for me, all of my personal horses are going to be laid down just because it's one of those things I do sometimes in demos and so forth, and I want them all to have the experience, even if they're the kind of horse that doesn't get a lot from it. So the people doing more of the positive reinforcement side of it, there is still the factor of the horse making the choice, and a conscious choice. And so I think that's good. But I'm just not convinced. I've seen it done a little bit. I full disclosure, I have not trained one this way myself, but I kind of view that more as a trick. And I'll say right here, a horseman I respect, Dan James, says that that's the only way that he'll do it anymore, and he's been convinced to go that way. And I mean, he's certainly a guy that knows his stuff. So I'm not saying that I'm absolutely right on this, and anyone that disagrees is wrong. I'm telling you, I'm not experienced with that method. But I kind of like watching the horse. I don't like watching. Okay, that's a poor way of saying it. I like that the horse fights it and loses. To me, that is the most important part of it. It's the fact that we didn't avoid fight or flight. We kind of went through it to the other side and then had that conscious choice. usually it's the ones that fight the hardest that benefit the most from it. So to me, it would make sense that if the horse has no fight in this deal whatsoever, we're going to get less and less of a benefit. One of the things I'll say about this too is that I don't lay horses down daily. And in fact, most horses probably only get laid down once, maybe twice. They have to be really bad for me to lay them down multiple times. I find that if I do lay them down multiple times, the effect of it is lessened each time. So if I'm going to lay one down multiple times, like I might lay them down today, I might wait for a real bad day in 2 or 3 weeks. They're just really having a bad day. Then I'll lay them down again. I don't usually lay them down on a Monday and then the following Tuesday. So I want them separated by some time. I do view this as a big picture sort of an event for the horse. I know I'm talking about this a lot, but it's pretty deep psychology, really. We discussed earlier about the mules and the tonic state. That's really something we're wanting to avoid. There are people that are not a fan of laying horses down, and that's usually the verbiage that they use, or they push it in that direction. I would say laying a horse down correctly is all about doing it with feel and balance and setting it up so that it is a conscious choice in the end. So I like that they fight, but I also need them to make the conscious choice. Tonic states are not conscious choices. They're quite the opposite. They are deep into the unconscious. So if you push an animal to that extreme, A, learning has long since ceased, and this is all supposed to be a learning experience. And B, some pretty extreme things probably happen to get the animal to go there. And that's not something I really want a part of. I've laid a bunch of horses down in front of crowds. I mean, they can flip over sometimes, but by and large, it's a lot less dramatic of an event than what people realize that it is. And like I say, for a good candidate, it can really be a life-changing type of an experience. One other thing that I want to make sure that I say regarding laying a horse down, I don't do a whole lot of stuff with or to the horse when they're down. I don't generally, I'm not going to stand over them with a flag or drag tarps onto them or that sort of thing. To me, that is maybe beating a dead horse, taking the principle farther than it needs to be taken. I'm generally getting a whole lot of good out of laying them down without having to take things to that sort of a step. I would kind of say that when you get to that point, the real core lesson you needed from laying him down has been learned, and you're now turning it into sort of a trick well past the point of the horse accepting it. The accepting was the part of it that I needed.
Christy writes, Daniel, since I tend to get horses that other people have tried to train, I sometimes lose my place in the steps I take. I do my own training. My current mare is sour on life because she was treated harshly. I ride in a snaffle and slobber despite her age. She is not soft, and I feel she needs to soften up before I change her bit. Makes me wonder if other people may have a similar situation and if it can be addressed.
Okay, so Christy, this is a great question, and I'll start answering this by saying that Christy and I have had a lot of conversations about this behind the scenes through messaging and so forth. And so I hope I don't inadvertently bring into this something that I know that the rest of the audience may not know. I'm going to try to stay general. I have some conflicting thoughts on this. One of those is that I am definitely not a horse trainer that believes in setting up a lot of routines with a horse. And what I kind of refer to that sometimes as tab A and the slot B type horsemanship. I do not have 10 things in a row that I'm doing when starting a colt. I'm much more of the school of thought that I want to always be reading the horse, and then I tailor what I'm fixing to do based off of what I'm reading in the horse. So this horse may get started quite differently than this other horse. My groundwork today may be quite different for this horse than that horse because I'm reading two different things in the two horses. If I'm doing the same thing every day to different horses, to me, that's poor horsemanship. That isn't reading the horse. That isn't taking the information from the horse and customizing what you're doing to it. And in fact, if you hear me talk, a whole lot of what I talk about is about consciously and intentionally breaking patterns to cause the horse to thought. A lot of the problems that we have with horses is when we get an unwanted conditioned response, anticipatory type behaviors with horses. And when we get those accidentally and we recognize it, you have to break the pattern to cause the horse to think, to get them out of the bad pattern. That being said, it's not like I don't have a checklist of things that I want to go over with a horse. I just sent a colt home, pretty nice colt. I liked him a lot, but he had a significant amount of work already done with him when he came here. He had done a lot of round pin work. He had been driven. He had a lot of desensitizing done on him, and he had a bunch of verbal cues already put on him. I know as an owner, you would probably think that that's making life better and easier for the horse when it goes to get started because it's already so advanced. Let me just tell you that from my perspective as a horse trainer, there's a flip side to that coin. First of all, the way that you did all of that might not be the same way that I do it. And I would hope that you recognize part of the benefit that you get from bringing a horse to me or to someone experienced like I am is that over the course of hundreds or thousands of horses, you learn a whole lot of little nuances of better ways to do things. And so you may have done some round pin work with this horse, but in the process of going through it, I see 10 different habits that got started that would take me a significant amount of time to iron out to get this horse to a better level. Is it worth me putting that time in on little things that you're probably going to, 30 seconds after working him at home, going to revert him right back to? Probably not worth my time, right? Or it's a conversation I may want to have with you and decide, hey, would you be okay with me spending a little more groundwork time on this horse and a little less saddle time in order to iron these things out? Because this is what I'm seeing and so forth. The other part of that is that when I get a colt in to start, I have to build a rapport with that animal. And the best way for me to do that is to work him and hopefully on new things. And so if everything I'm going to do with him has already been done, there's nothing new for me to do. It's a lot more difficult for me to build that rapport. And that colt is going to bring his expectations of other people into our relationship. Believe it or not, his handling by other people prior to coming to me might not be great handling. There might be some problems there, even if he appears to be gentle. I would say this colt that I just dealt with was a little bit of a shutdown horse, meaning when he first came to me, he would appear to most people to be bulletproof. The way that I tried to explain this to the owner is that the desensitizing that had been done to him, the response that he was actually giving was kind of like a turtle. He was just withdrawing into the shell and shutting out all of the outside world. That's not really the kind of desensitizing that I want done on a horse. I want a horse to deal with the outside world in such a manner where he still predominantly has his attention on me and is still responsive to what I'm asking him. This horse wasn't. I couldn't wave the flag over the saddle and bend him around to the left or whatever because he was completely shut down. So the reality is, even though that horse was quote unquote desensitized, as I start withdrawing him from that shell and building rapport to him, he became more sensitive and started getting more reactive to things he previously had not. And that's not uncommon. Sometimes when you start to expose that stuff, the emotions get raw and we go through a period of things seeming to get worse before we get to a point of them getting better. So I really prefer for people to bring me as close to a blank slate as they can. Now, beggars can't be choosers, right? I don't, it's your horse at the end of the day, and you're going to do with him what you're going to do with him. But I like for them to be basically halter broke. Maybe they can tie it up without a big fuss, and their feet can be handled so that when they get to me, their hooves are in reasonable shape. And that's really about it. That is my ideal. I really would prefer that you haven't ponied him and waved a flag around him and run him around the round pen for 6 months and all of these other things. Like for instance, we're November, December. This is when a lot of the big sales at the futurities happen, and you can go buy some beautiful, very well bred yearlings right now that'll be ready to start in the spring. And a lot of those yearlings go to professional fitters, and those professional fitters feed the hell out of them, groom the hell out of them, and exercise them in a round pen for about 20 minutes every day. This is one of my least favorite times of year, because you buy that really well-bred, gorgeous, muscled-up colt, and you bring him to me, and I put him in a round pen, and he immediately starts running to the left with his mind completely turned off and his eyes closed, because that's what's been done to him for the last 2 months at the professional fitter. And I have to work him for 30 minutes, breaking the pattern, because we went 10 minutes longer than he's used to, before he begins to look up and go, oh, there's a new guy standing in the middle of the round pen. Those horses are completely shut off, and it is a pain in the ass to try to take one that is habituated like that and get him to start thinking again. On the mental side of things, it is, well, physically too, because they're in really good shape. You got to run them a long time before we even kind of start the day. It's physically and mentally more difficult on those horses because of the way they've been handled. If you're going to go hire an expert to start a horse for you, let them start the horse for you. Now, Christy's talking about out of order things. So like this particular colt that I just got in, he had a lot of verbal cues on him. One of the things that had been done in the round pen, one of my most important foundational groundwork exercises, is that the horse learns to read my energy. So I can raise my energy and he will speed up. I can lower my energy and he will slow down. I need them reading that pretty well before I ride him. This horse, once again, wasn't looking for that at all. He was looking for the verbal cues. This is one of the most foundational exercises that actually transfers from groundwork to riding. Most of the colts that I get riding that way, on the very first or second ride, I can raise my energy and speed them up, and then I can lower my energy and drop them out of a trot down to a walk and down to a stop within a few steps without ever picking the reins up, just because they're feeling my energy, they're reading my seat, and they're speeding up and slowing down off of that. This colt was on autopilot. I could sit back on him and take all of my energy away, and he would just keep going on autopilot until he got the verbal cue. So with this horse, the thing that's out of order is the verbal cues. The typical way that you're going to do a verbal cue with a horse is, first you're going to get the action. Then you are going to overlay the verbal cue with an action you already have. You'll associate it that way. And that way, because the action already exists, every single time you use the verbal cue, the right outcome is going to happen, and you have a very good bond and association of that verbal cue with the proper action rather than with an improper action. So verbal cues for me always come after I already have what I want. So that's things that are out of order. How do I deal with that? It's a slow and arduous process. You just have to keep presenting it to them time and time and time again until they start to see the new pattern. So this particular colt, I rode 2 or 3 rides on him using the verbal cues. When I really began to see the dynamic that I was having here and how much he wasn't picking up on my energy in my seat, I got quiet for a couple of weeks. And I stopped using that stuff where he would just have to get tired and be looking for the ability to stop and finally start to find my seat. And he had picked up on my seat by the end of he went home yesterday, but still not to nearly the degree that a horse that I would have had the blank slate would have. Anytime a horse already has the anticipatory stuff, his blackboard is full, he has a level of expectation. It takes longer to change what he expects and looks for than it would to install that in the first place. So I know Christy has asked me a lot of times about trust and things like that too. Trust, I don't really view as something that we work on directly with horses. I think that trust is a byproduct of the way you handle your horse. You're either going to be consistent enough that he can see you coming, he's not scared of you, and then he will begin to trust you, or you're going to sneak up on him, surprise him, do things he didn't expect, and he's going to lose trust for you. And so I don't think that there is really an exercise or a series of exercises to work on trust. I think trust is just like with people, it is based more on your actions over time and consistency or inconsistency than anything else. So I don't ever really focus on building trust with a horse. I do talk about rapport a fair bit, but that's not even necessarily trust. That has as much to do with dominance and submission and other things as it does with trust. So again, with the out of order stuff, one of the things I would really look for is what's the advanced thing, and then I'm going to do away with the advanced thing, and I'm going to try to bring the horse down to the basest level that we've got established and start my work there. It's not at all uncommon to find horses that have holes in the foundation like this. One of the things she also talked about with this horse was that the horse wasn't soft. I'm going to at some point sound like a broken record to some of you who are following everything I do, but you cannot overdo walking a horse forward very slowly and subtly, picking up on the left rein until they bend around, and then you go into neutral. And the same thing on the right. There are so many horses that need to do that exercise 8 million times until they really are soft. They aren't flinching. I had a conversation last night with a lady who was a barrel racer, and she sent me some videos, and essentially her horse, every time she picked up the reins, her horse was flinching. And when I used that phrase with her and she went back and watched the videos, she was like, oh my God, she really is. That horse needs to have an understanding of what you picking up that rein means so that they can not be fearful of it, can see you coming and can respond. And when they can see you coming and they know what the cue is for and they're comfortable with it, they will respond lightly. If they aren't comfortable with it, if they don't see you coming, if they don't know what is expected by that rein, they will brace against you. That's where most of you are. So one rein at a time for a long time is one of the best prescriptions I could write. There are so many problems that horses have that are easily solved by repetitiously picking up one rein at a time and bending the horse around and getting them to be soft and comfortable like that. One other thing I would like to say about things being out of order, the vast majority of the time that you spend actually training a horse is spent sensitizing. Not desensitizing, it's really sensitizing. If we're softening the horse in the bridle, lateral flexion, Vertical flexion, we're trying to get them to rate off of our seat a little bit better, move off of our feet a little bit more laterally, perfect the spin, perfect, turns on a jumping course, changing leads, whatever. All of that is a sensitizing process. Sensitizing should require you to be backing up to a simpler step, reinforcing the simpler step, reminding the horse of it, and then parlaying that into the more complicated steps. So maybe if we have lead changes we're working on, we have to stop a few times, move the horse's hip to the right, move his hip to the right, move his hip to the right. Now ask for the left lead or right lead departure so that he's again driving with his left hind leg as he should be, or whatever the deal. Or maybe in the lead departures he is throwing his head up in the air and we need to stop and slow him down and drive him into the bridle and soften the vertical flexion a bit more so that when we get that oomph into the departure, he's not throwing his head up and pushing into the bridle. It doesn't really matter what it is. The process is sensitizing, which again constantly involves backing up to more foundational, simpler principles, reinforcing them before moving forward again. That's what almost all of your time actually training a horse is spent doing. So, out of order is kind of normal. There is no set order or method for tab A, slot B. It goes like this. Different for every horse, different every ride, different every day. We're going to call it a day right there. Thank y'all all for the questions. We're going to keep the pattern here. The first podcast of each month will be a Q&A. I hope y'all have been enjoying these. If you are on a service that allows it, please give us a review, a comment, or a rating. Please 5 stars. If it's not going to be 5 stars, then just keep that to yourself. Please also help us by sharing the podcast, telling your friends about it, and helping me toward my eventual goal of world domination. Everybody have a Merry Christmas or whichever holiday you celebrate in your home, and a Happy New Year. We will talk to you again in January. Thank you much for following. Have a blessed New Year. Hope it's a whole lot better for all of us than this past one has been. We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.